Thank you, Matt. Yes, and I will be short. I think probably just a few minutes, because I want to just put out a teaser here to introduce really the sorts of things that the rest of my wonderful panel is going to talk about. So let me get started very quickly. And as we're looking through the few slides that I've got, just a few, I wanted to say that this is really a very large, part of a very, very large project, a research project that I've been working on for about 5 years. So I'm looking at the accessibility of government information of all kinds. And what do I mean by all kinds? Well, you can actually see what I've said up there. Just about anything that government has is government information. And that includes data sets, which I am now looking at very carefully. And in fact, you will see it on a couple of the graphs that I have. I can only show that and analyze that because now we have an open data policy to get at that data. Now, I'm concentrating particularly on Commonwealth data, Commonwealth government information, and on our panel we have two people who are going to be talking about state, and one person who's going to go internationally. Yes? More or less. Yes, okay. So how do we actually get at this information? Well, there are a range of different ways, four to be precise. One is when it is proactively published by government departments on their websites. The second is, if you want the information, it's not on the website, then you can informally request it, and that is happening quite a lot. If that doesn't work, if neither one of those works, then you can put in a formal Freedom of Information request and hopefully get the information, although not always do you do so. Or the last idea is to wait for 20 years. And then you can get it from the National Archives in their open access period, which is after 20 years. So what we're going to look at today, what I'm going to particularly look at today, when it is proactively published, okay, on the website, and the second one of the Freedom of Information requests. How many of you have tried to find information on a government website? Yeah, we all have, right. How many of you resort to Google? Yeah. You're not the only one, and Kate, it's the way of life, as you know. All right. So I've got a tiny little case study that I will talk about dealing with what happens when you are looking for information that is proactively published. But before we do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Commonwealth Freedom of Information, or government access, really. Freedom of Information, of course, started in 1982, but it was not until the middle of, well, actually, look, the 2009-2010 reforms. There were huge reforms that really made a big difference. In 2009, the Freedom of Information Act was amended, and open government was declared. The Commonwealth government said, open government. In fact, they actually said, open access to information is the default position. And this was said by all kinds of people in government, but I have quoted at that time, the Australian Information Commissioner, John Macmillan. Then in 2010, we had some other things that happened. One was the Australian Information Commission Act, which is what we call OAIC at the moment. In 2010 also, we had the Open Data Portal established, when Commonwealth governments would put their data sets up into an open portal. Some successfully, some not quite so successfully, but I'm not really going to talk about that at the moment. And the other one that was very, very interesting was also in 2010, the Australian Government Website Archives, just called AGWA, which is established at the National Library, where the websites are constantly being archived at the National Library. And although they were doing it a little bit before then, it wasn't until they made Creative Commons, and they did not have, and they waived permission in order to take a copy, that this really took off. And that is a very interesting idea. How many of you have heard of the ATWA? The Internet Archive. Well, they worked together, the National Library and the Internet Archive, and they came up with this particular system. And this is helpful when I show you the little case study. All right, so Commonwealth FOI requests. Now, this data comes from the Open Government Data Archive, the Open Data Portal. I'm not going to speak about all of them, but you can see a range of ups and downs there, ebbs and flows. Along here, fees. But more importantly, that I wanted to talk about is this more data that is available on the web. As they started putting data up on the web, then requests for data, formal requests for data, of course, were falling. There are a range of other reasons why it started going down further and then going back up again, but I really don't want to talk about that today. But if anybody's interested, I'm very happy to do so later. All right, now, it wasn't until 2000 that the requests for freedom of information were actually separated from asking for personal information, your own personal information, or for information about policy-related decisions, okay? So when we looked at that after 2000, you can actually see here that personal information is very high. People are always looking for their own personal information, or they want to be able to amend what is collected about them. Whereas the green line, which is much, much lower, are policy-related information. Now, at the Commonwealth level, obviously, the majority of requests are for personal information. That's because we have tax information, ATO, Centrelink, those sorts of things. Whereas in Elizabeth's Valentine's Day report that came out last week in New South Wales, last year, the 45% of the requests were for policy-related information, not personal information. And there would be reasons for that, and if you were interested, you could possibly ask Elizabeth at a later date. All right. But many of these policy-related requests were refused outright on privacy issues. Rightly or wrongly, and again, I can talk about that later, but I'm not going to right now. But you can see this table here, about 15% of all policy-related requests were refused on grounds of privacy. That's the way it goes, and that that's outright. There are lots of others that, they will grant, but that you can't read it because it's all black ink, yeah? So that's the other side of things. All right. So this little case study that I had was in 2014, where we had 500 undergraduate students. Undergraduate students are reasonably cluey. They're not disadvantaged in facilities or for anything else for that matter. And they were asked to find submissions to a departmental inquiry, the Finkelstein inquiry about media. And they were asked to find these submissions, and of course they did what everybody does. They went straight to Google and they couldn't find them. They did actually find the final report, but not at the department, which was the Department of Communications at that time. They didn't find it there. They found it at the ABC, so yay, ABC. But the government actually changed in 2013, so they got a new website. Different URL, new website, and the whole website changed completely. The site search that they did have on the website, didn't find it. There was no site map, there were no navigation devices, there was no nothing. And the students immediately said, they've taken it away. They didn't say it's missing, they said they've taken it away. Oh, I think we might be talking a little bit about trust a little later on. They've taken it away, and that's what the students thought immediately. There was no pointer at that time in 2014 to the AGWA, this idea that If it's not there, then you can go straight to the archive at the National Library and get a copy of that website. And the students, in spite of all my talking, didn't know about the Internet Archive, where you can also find information. Now, this is it was actually a shocking case study as far as I was concerned. And that got me started on thinking of how we might start teaching more about access to government information. So what are the challenges? From the point of view of departments, government departments, what do they release on their website? When do they release them? Okay? What is that decision-making process? Web design is an enormous challenge. I don't know if you've noticed that websites now look entirely different from the way they used to about 3 years ago. And my question is the website a promotional site for the department, or is it an informational site? I'm not going to give my opinion, but I would be interested in yours at a later date. There is always a need for good navigation. Even though search is the preferred way of doing things, you see a Google search box in there, then they're going to search for it. But that brings up the question of who is tagging the data in the content management system so it can be found with a search. And in 2014, I can assure you, I don't think there was any tagging going on at all on that particular website. Now, the major question, and it's not the fault of anybody, whether you're going to be a cynic or not, but the dynamic nature of the website, things disappear. How do they disappear? When are they taken down? Why are they taken down? Is it just done on a particular date or a particular time? But the point there is there's got to be a way of saying, well, where did it go? How can we find it? The ubiquity of search, that's what we all use, and very much we have to teach our younger people and our middle-aged people and our older people what search is all about so they can actually understand it. So those are the challenges, those are the issues, and I'm going to turn